Dungeons and Dragons is a game with no ending and no set story. Anything can happen and nobody can ever really win. There is no screen and no menu, and the only thing you can do is roll dice and make weird voices.
The Demogorgon is tired of your silly human bickering! It stops towards you. Boom!
It sounds boring and confusing, but I'm here to tell you that this game is so much more than what you think it is. And I am here to tell you why you should give Dungeons and Dragons a shot. Yes, even if you do already own Skyrim. Many of you might know Dungeons and Dragons, or D&D, only from the satanic panic of the 80s. Some of you might know it from Stranger Things, and some of you might even have a friend that is oddly obsessed with Critical Role. For those of you that aren't familiar or need a quick refresher, one of the most succinct ways I've seen people describe Dungeons and Dragons is like the make-believe of our childhood, but with actual rules. D&D is a fantasy role-playing game in which the players create and control their own character. The game is guided by one player called the Dungeon Master, or DM, who serves as the game's storyteller and referee. The Dungeon Master also describes and plays the various inhabitants and monsters of the imagined world, and he frequently describes the settings in which the characters find themselves. Using their different skills, the player characters solve riddles, fight dragons and snake monsters, steal from innocent townsfolk, assassinate kings, and do whatever else they want to do. Over the course of several sessions, the characters level up and become stronger, and their adventures often form an overarching story. Mechanically, the outcomes of the party's actions, as well as any conflicts in the game, are solved by dice rolls in conjunction with the rules of the game. These rules provide a structure and a certain amount of realism, believability, and, ironically, predictability that make it easier for many players to submerge themselves in the adventure. These elements, the rules and the dice, also bind the player's actions, and they are what separates Dungeons and Dragons from playing make-believe. Dungeons and Dragons has been around for some 40 years, and while its popularity has waxed and waned over the years, it never seems to go away. But what is it that makes D&D so durable, and why is it still around when games like Skyrim or The Witcher exist? In my opinion, one thing that really sets D&D apart from other games is the room for limitless creativity. While it may look like the players and the game master are playing against each other, the case is actually quite the opposite. The players and the game master work together to continuously create a world and fill it with tales they spin as they go. If you want to play as an elf sorcerer from a powerful family or a devilish bard that seduces everything they see, that can be done easily. But it is almost just as easy to have an adventure about time-traveling handsome dudes or adventurous high schoolers or a spaceship invaded by mysterious alien life forms. Ultimately, anything is possible within the framework of D&D as long as the player's imagination allows it. While modern video games are incredibly extensive with tight stories and well-written characters, they are still hard-pressed to compete with the absolute freedom of choice that D&D offers. You don't want to kill that goblin but adopt it and teach it magic? Do it! You don't want to follow the main story and open a gentleman's club in a wealthy town instead? Fuck yeah, do it! You want to leave the game world and go to another dimension to battle giant floating extra-dimensional whales? Hey, as long as your DM is on board, nobody is stopping you. Another thing to keep in mind is the storytelling. Dungeons and Dragons is often described as a story you tell together with your friends. This is something that makes playing this game feel quite special. It feels as though you and your friends create a whole adventure out of thin air. It is your own, it is tailored to what you want from a story, and it is absolutely unique. Finally, and I believe this aspect of D&D is what makes it truly ageless, this game is an incredibly social one. Playing Dungeons and Dragons requires a group, but don't be fooled into thinking that you need a large and well-established friends group to get started. There are many places online and in real life where you can find a playgroup, sign up, and get started within a matter of minutes. But here's the really cool thing. Even if you play with people that you have never met, you're bound to become friends with some of them sooner or later. This game requires social contact and cooperation, and fighting world-ending calamities together, even if they are imaginary, is a great way to forge bonds that may last for a lifetime. Also, hey, there's going to be a game night at my place and we will have some snacks and pretend to be badass adventurers that are trying to kill an all-powerful orc lord, and there might be beer. It's just a really hard pitch to say no to, you know? Now that you've watched this video, you're probably itching to start your own game of D&D, but how and where should you start? Well, all you need to start is a group of players, a set of dice, and an idea for a character. More practically though, it can't harm to become a little acquainted with the idea of playing Dungeons and Dragons before you jump in. Firstly, no dungeon master in this world is going to be upset if you own a copy of the player handbook or have at least taken a look at it. In theory, only one player, the DM, needs to know the rules of the game, but it becomes a lot more playable when all players have at least a rough idea of how this game should work. Another great starting point is to look up actual play Dungeons and Dragons shows. These are shows where people stream or record their actual Dungeons and Dragons games. Some of them add a lot of special effects, while others really are just the undistilled D&D experience, but all of them offer good insight into how this game can be played. For a starting point, I would recommend taking a look at Critical Role, Dimension 20, or Dungeons and Daddies, but there are countless similar shows and podcasts, so there is definitely one that suits your tastes. Shows like these have also played a huge role in the recent resurgence of Dungeons and Dragons, so you would certainly not be the first to be lured into playing D&D this way. Personally, I started playing the game after listening to way too much Critical Role. Now that you've read up on some of the rules, you've found a D&D show that you really like, there's really only one thing left to do. Pick an established world like Faerun or Eberron, or make one up yourself, get a group of friends, convince them to watch this video, or any of the other 5,000 videos on D&D, and start your own adventure. If you don't have friends, or your friends don't want to kill dragons in dungeons for some reason, I recommend the subreddits r/LFG, r/LFG Europe, and r/LFG Premium. The folks on these subreddits are, for the most part, great people that are always willing to hook a new player up with a fun group. As a final note, it's important to remember that there is no single correct way to play this game. Matt Mercer and his friends on Critical Role have one way, the cast of Dimension 20 have a completely different one, and your playstyle will, and should, differentiate from any other group. As long as you and everyone at the table is having a good time, you are always doing it right. Thanks for watching this video. I'd love to hear about your own D&D adventures in the comments, and if you have kinda enjoyed this little introduction, I would really appreciate a subscribe.